A Vancouver Island woman who was killed last week is being identified as a respected and beloved instructor at Camosun College.
Laura was feeling very overwhelmed and very stressed by the upcoming court date that was going to be the following day.
In what became their last conversation, Laura Gover's best friend says Laura was voicing fear about what was to come. And it was just one day before police found her dead in a Saanich home. That's the detail that sticks, because it turns us into more than a headline. It's a countdown that people around her felt coming and couldn't prevent. To understand what happened, we had to go back to the beginning. Laura wasn't someone who blended into the background. She was the kind of person who made a room feel steadier because she showed up prepared. She remembered what mattered to people, and she carried herself like someone who had learned how to be strong without having to announce it. Laura was a business instructor, and Vancouver Island University says she spent more than a decade teaching, leaving a lasting impact on students through mentorship and academic work. Laura was still doing what she had always done, showing up for students and making people feel steady. On Rate My Professors, Laura was sitting at a 5 out of 5 rating. And on October 3rd, a student left a review. Laura was a truly remarkable instructor, describing her as compassionate, someone who made students feel seen, heard, and valued, and said they felt fortunate to have been her student, recommending her to anyone who wanted to learn from a passionate, skillful instructor. Global News reported that she was also a member of the faculty at both VIU and Camosun College, and she was widely remembered as a dedicated educator and mother. But the most consistent detail, the one that keeps repeating through every tribute and every fundraiser's description, is that her daughters were the center of her world. If you want to understand why this story hit Vancouver Island so hard, start there. Start with the idea that someone can build a life around love and routine, school mornings, homework, family traditions, and still find themselves living under a kind of pressure that doesn't show in public. On January 4th, Laura Gover spoke with her best friend. Not a dramatic goodbye, not a grand confession, just a conversation that carried a weight Laura couldn't hide anymore. Her friend says Laura was expressing concern about what was coming next, and then the calendar flipped one more day. On January 5th, 2026, police began investigating what they called a suspicious death at a home in the 1600 block of Blair Avenue in Saanich, BC. The woman found inside was Laura Gover, a professor, an educator, and according to those who knew her best, a mother whose world revolved around two daughters, 7 and 11 years old. And almost immediately, the case locked onto another name, Muhammed Ali Basar. Muhammad, originally from Istanbul, Turkey, who migrated to Canada, is identified in reporting as her ex-husband. Police would later say he was arrested, released, and then arrested again, before a charge finally landed. If you're listening to this and thinking, how does that happen? You're already in the heart of the story, because this isn't only about one terrible day. It's about the stretch of days and months leading up to it. The paperwork, the court dates, the quiet fear that some people learn to carry like a second heartbeat. Because January 5th wasn't just the day police opened a death investigation. It was also a day that had been circled for another reason. Global News reported that court records show Basar was accused of disobeying a court order in Saanich on October 24th, 2025, with the charge sworn on November 14th and a court appearance scheduled for January 5th. Court records also show Laura filed a family law proceeding against Basar on November 19th in BC Supreme Court in Victoria. And that's where the story becomes uncomfortable. You realize what those days represent in real life. Meetings you can't skip, processes you can't control, and the constant need to stay alert because you don't know how the other person is going to react when the system finally addresses them. Which brings us back to January, back to the last conversation, back to the fear her friend says Laura expressed. Fear of what was coming, and then she didn't get a second chance. On January 5th, police began investigating the suspicious death. They took Basar into custody that day, then released him the next day without charges. Reporting later said police described it as being early in the investigation. Then, January 9th, police arrested him again. He remains in custody, and reporting states he is scheduled to appear in court on January 21st in Victoria. That sequence, custody, release, rearrest, tends to be the moment where communities start asking the same question in 100 different ways. People ask if the risk existed, and why didn't the system hold? Looking into Canadian law, for a second-degree murder, legally, if someone is convicted of murder, the sentence is life in prison. The difference is parole eligibility. For second-degree murder, the judge sets how long before the person can apply for parole. Anywhere from 10 to 25 years. And I want to be clear, that's not a guarantee they'll ever be released. Parole can be denied and denied again. But here's the problem with it. When a life is taken, 10 years can still sound way too soon to even have the conversation about a way back out. Even 25 years can still feel like a countdown that only exists for one side. The victim doesn't get a second chance. The family doesn't get to rewind anything. So when the system starts talking about eligibility, it can kind of sound like the paperwork is already making room for mercy. But again, for legal reasons, this is a reporting about a charge and not yet a conviction. No one is guilty till proven guilty in a court of law. I spent more time reading about similar cases like this across British Columbia and the rest of Canada, and it's truly heartbreaking, so I wanted to keep digging into this topic because murders like this raise awareness in the hardest possible way. A woman shouldn't be forced to live in fear, especially in her own home. And when courts and services fail to protect someone before it turns fatal, it's not extreme to ask whether our self-defense laws are leaving victims trapped between two impossible choices. Do nothing and hope you survive, or do what you must and hope you don't get crushed by the system afterward. Self-defense laws in Canada can feel weirdly grey, like you're told you have the right to defend yourself, but you're also left guessing what your rights even looks like in the moment you need it most. On paper, section 34 of the criminal code says you're not guilty if you reasonably believe force or threat of force is being used. You act for a defensive purpose, and what you did was reasonable in the circumstances. If you successfully defend yourself and find yourself with legal issues, during this process, courts take a lengthy amount of time and lawyers can be quite expensive. It also adds another element if you have a family you need to provide for. We do need more protection for women, and updated laws that make it easier for women to feel safe. I wanted to go into more detail, so I'll make a separate video about this in the future. But I want to bring it back to Laura now. Because she was never just a name in a news story. She was a respected educator on Vancouver Island. Someone students and colleagues adored, and above all, she was a mother whose whole world revolved around her two daughters. And now those girls are the ones left carrying the aftermath. Laura's best friend Kelsey McLaughlin set up a GoFundMe to help support them, covering the practical needs now and building longer-term stability as they grew up without their mom. It's one of the clearest signs of what Laura meant to people, the community showing up, not just with words, but with real help for the two lives she cared about most.